Well, good morning, everyone. Tourism in Washington County is over a $500 million business each year. However, what makes Washington County unique is the fact that we have a very diverse portfolio in terms of our tourism assets, and that is no better witness than today here at Little Lake Theater, which is celebrating its 75th anniversary season. Please join me in a quick round of applause for all that hard work. Not only, of course, do we have major amenities, but we also, of course, have a diverse set of assets specifically concentrating on historical and cultural, and this one is no exception. And we also rely, of course, on the strong support of our partners throughout the region, our county commissioners, our tourism promotion agency, the community, and, of course, our state legislative officials. And it's my pleasure to introduce a strong supporter of Little Lake Theater, Senator Camera Bartolotta. Senator?
Having this place be in this area for 75 years now. I was just mentioning as I was coming in that I came here to this theater with my stepkids when they were very young, and they are now 40 and 44. So it's been a long, long time, but it's been 75 years of pure joy and wonderful culture and a great experience for so many people. So it is my absolute pleasure to present a Senate certificate of recognition, and I will read it to you. Celebrating the 75th season, Little Lake Theater. And again, we're theater in the round, so if I turn my back to you, it's okay, right? We're gonna, okay. Established in 1949 by Will Disney and his mother Edith, the Little Lake Theater and its experimental Center Arena stage began entertaining audiences with live plays. Patronage steadily grew over the first few years and helped provide support for renovations and expansions to the old barn that has evolved into its current design today. The picturesque Little Lake has performed hundreds of shows over 74 seasons with all volunteer casts. Continuing the theater's tradition of being innovative, the theater recently partnered with the Western Pennsylvania School for the Deaf for a production that involved both deaf and hearing cast members. The unique performance was in spoken English and American Sign Language. Now, therefore, I, Senator Camera Bartolotta, do recognize and celebrate the start of the 75th season of amazing live stage plays at the Little Lake Theater on this date, March 28th, 2023. I wish to extend my sincerest congratulations to the Little Lake Theater Company on this very special occasion and extend my very best wishes for continued success in the future.
On behalf of the Little Lake Board and our Little Lake community, we thank you so much for your support.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bartolotta has been a staunch supporter of Little Lake Theater over the years. The senator gets it. It's not just about economic development and job creation and infrastructure development. And while that's important, it's also important to highlight arts and culture within Washington County. And Senator, thank you so much for your support of all those efforts and making our county a great place to live. It's my pleasure to introduce Patrick Cannon, who's the Artistic Director of Little Lake, to tell you about the season and give you some updates on what's going on. Patrick?
Thank you. So a church without its congregation is just an empty building. Little Lake Theater Company without its audiences is just an empty theater and barn. I love this theater and I love our barn, don't get me wrong, but it's the hearts and minds of those who walk through those doors that make Little Lake Theater Company what it is. It's the actors whose blood, sweat, and tears are deeply soaked into this stage, hopefully fake blood. It's the audience members whose crumbs are deeply embedded into our floors. I kid. It's the audience members who open their hearts and minds and allow us to serve as a mirror to art and life. It's the board members who, for no other reason other than caring about the greater good of our community, take time away from their families and jobs to lend a hand in countless ways, whether it's finding creative solutions to difficult problems or dreaming up a bigger and brighter future for the lake. It's Patty Knapp, our managing director, whose passion for Little Lake knows no bounds. It's Leanne, our wonderful house manager, whose knowledge of this theater is darn near encyclopedic. It's Melanie and Nikki in the box office. It's our incredible bar staff, our fiercely loyal volunteers. It's our apprentices, the true future of our community. It's each and every one of you here with us today. Our community is made up of some of the most talented, creative, and passionate people you'll ever meet. There's a palpable kindness that pulses through our community of artists and audiences. It's a great honor to serve as your artistic director. Our 75th anniversary season is dedicated to all the past, present, and future storytellers that have graced our historic Little Lake Barn and main stage. It's a season that expresses the power of storytelling, leans into the magic of live theater, and then highlights the inherently intimate and immersive nature of our space here at the lake. These 10 plays and musicals explore the impact storytellers have on our society and enforce the idea that theater can, in fact, change the world. I talked with my fiance, Emily, at great length about the fact that I was frustrated with challenging myself to articulate the theme of our 2023 season in the most efficient way. How could I possibly sum it up in a few words? 10 shows, you know? And at one point she asked where I was with all of it, and I told her I was thinking something along the lines of exploring the inherent meta-theatrical awareness of our place in the community as a home and safe haven for artists and storytellers, and in turn, our permanence as shepherds of legacy through creative expression and collaboration through an impermanent art form. And she kindly informed me that that would not look very good on a poster. So this is where I landed. On behalf of the Little Lake family, I'm proud to present Little Lake Theater Company's 75th anniversary, Little Lake Big Stories. We're eager to invite you into next season, and it's our hope that these offerings serve in honoring the past and forging new paths. Our season kicks off with an incredibly imaginative and charming play that has been described as Waiting for Guffman meets Greater Tuna. I'm excited to bring Popcorn Falls by James Hinman to the lake. We open April 6th. I got to see it for the first time a couple weeks ago, and it is hilarious, and it's a Herculean task, and the actors are doing a rather remarkable job. Following that hilarity, we shift gears into a lovable musical specifically designed for young audiences, featuring our favorite inquisitive, lovable monkey star of books, movies, and the award-winning PBS show Curious George. April 27th through May 7th, we're thrilled to present Curious George, the Golden Meatball. With every flip and swing, George takes the audience through a fun-filled adventure in which he learns more about Rome and meatballs and the secret ingredient to cooking. And the third show of our season has both a Grammy nomination, 3 Olivier Award nominations, and is based on a much-loved 5-time Oscar-nominated film, Amelie, the musical. Amelie is an extraordinary young woman who lives quietly in her mind, quietly in the world, but loudly in her mind. She secretly improvises small but extraordinary acts of kindness, discovering the possibilities around every corner and bringing happiness to those she encounters. The fourth show of our season is a play the New York Times says pairs philosophical daring and surreal tenderness. Join us June 15th through 25th as we bring Sarah Ruhl's play For Peter Pan on her 70th birthday to life. When Anne thinks of her father, she immediately remembers playing Peter Pan in her hometown theater in Iowa, particularly when he used to bring her flowers after her performance. Her memory is jogged by the fact that she and her 4 siblings are in their father's hospital room during his final moments. A tender, yearning tale that flies in the face of time in search of a second youth. And now, a comedic thriller with the intricately fashioned plot contortions sure to bring gasps and comedic lines sure to draw delighted chortles. July 20th through April 6th, Little Lake presents a play that holds the record for the longest-running comedy thriller on Broadway, a play that was nominated for 4 Tony Awards, including Best Play, Death Trap by Ira Levin. You may remember the movie with Michael Caine and Christopher Reeves. So, where are we at? Shifting gears back into theater for young audiences, August 17th through the 27th, the delicious adventures of Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory will light up the stage in this captivating adaptation of Roald Dahl's fantastical tale. And then, September 7th through 24th, Little Lake Theater Company presents Lord of the Flies. A plane wreck strands a group of English boys on a deserted island during wartime. As they slowly explore their newfound freedom, what starts out as fun and games turns into a vicious battle for power when the boys split into two opposing tribes, one that strives for civility and another that delights in savage violence. And then, October 5th through the 22nd, I'm immensely excited to bring this funny and charming play about the battle to save a legacy to the lake. And I'm thrilled that it will be directed by the lovely Sunny Disney Fitchett. The King's Men are getting the band back together. The goal is to gather the bard's scattered masterpieces and to bind them to each other and to history. Which is a big feat, especially for a community of actors who may know the ins and outs of iambic pentameter, but nothing about binding books. Even so, they undertake their mission with pluck and wit and hearts full of joy. It's a theatrical, beat-the-clock race to save a legacy, offering some of Shakespeare's greatest hits spoken by your favorite players. And then, our second-to-last show, November 2nd through 19th, Mr. Burns, a post-electric play. There's a play kind of sort of about The Simpsons. There's a play kind of sort of about The Simpsons. It's an ode to live theater and the resilience of Bart Simpson through the ages. Mr. Burns is an animated exploration of how the pop culture of one era might evolve into the mythology of another. And finally, our 10th show and final show of the season is based on the beloved, timeless film, the heartwarming musical adaptation, Irving Berlin's White Christmas. I don't think I need to tell you what that story is about, but it's a classic, and we're thrilled to bring that to the stage. Thanks for bearing with me through that. We do quite a lot of shows here.
Hi. I'm not sure why I was asked to speak, because I'm certainly not as old as this theater company. That distinction goes to my brother Dave, who is probably the only person on this planet that has been here since the very beginning of Little Lake Theater. And that's because he's ancient. Sorry, Dave. But I am the person that has been here her entire life, since the day I was born, which is kind of amazing. I mean, my earliest memories are from being in this place. But we're not here to talk about my memories. We're here to talk about the beginning of Little Lake. And I have this gift from my father. It's a grandparent's journal that he gave to my son almost 30 years ago. I gave him this blank journal, and he filled it with typewritten pages about his life. Never ask an actor to talk about their life. But he filled it with all kinds of information for Ben about growing up and about getting involved in theater and starting Little Lake Theater. And I thought I'd go to an authority and just read you a couple of things, a couple of entries of his about the very start of this theater. So I marked them. So-called barn theaters were very popular throughout, especially the East. One day I said to my mother, wouldn't it be fun to have a barn theater? And that did it. Anything her little boy wanted, my mother was going to see that he got. And my dad always backed my mother. So into the car we went, mother and I, one afternoon, and we were on our way to look at barns out in what were then the sticks. So I'm going to skip ahead. Mother and I rode around looking. In those days, my gosh, 45 years ago. So this is, it's pretty amazing. We're now on 75. We didn't have a nice wide highway between home and the theater. There was just the narrow road lined with trees and vegetation with very little else to indicate civilization. During college vacations, my pals and I would occasionally drive out to Donaldson's Crossroads, turn left, drive another half mile, and come to a very small amusement park. I think it was called Maplewood. I do remember it had a tremendous roller coaster. The park's long gone, and in its place is Peters Township High School. Well, Mother and I just couldn't seem to find the right barn until we came to Donaldson's Crossroads. On one corner was a restaurant, a gas station on another corner, Mrs. Donaldson's house still there, and I remember it being there 30 years ago, on the third corner, and nothing, I think, on the fourth corner. Instead of turning left to where the park used to be, we drove straight ahead for about 300 yards, turned right over a little lane, crossed a little bridge over the artificial lake, and there was a barn with empty fields on 3 sides, and of course, the lake on the 4th side. The farmer and his wife lived in a red brick house on the highway side of the lake. His name was Bill McDowell, and he was always accompanied by a German shepherd. There were more than a dozen cottages on our side of the lake, although we could only see 1 or 2. The rest were hidden by trees and so on. I'm going to skip ahead. Across the highway, there's a large shopping center, but in the 40s and 50s, the ground was owned by Bill's brother, Sam, who raised sheep on the property. Bill said, "Sam raises sheep, I raise cottages." And he and his wife lived on the rent from us and the cottages. Hold on. I did mark these. Oh. I mustn't forget to tell you that when we gave performances, Bill would sit in the audience, hear a funny line, and then after everyone else had finished laughing, he'd finally get the point, slap his knees, and bellow. Your grandmother and I were sitting in the basement of the barn one day running lines when Bill looked in the big open basement door and asked what we were doing. We told him we were rehearsing lines, to his complete surprise. He thought we just learned the general outline of the play and then made up the lines as we went along. He thought I was such a funny guy because I said such hilarious things on stage. And lastly, one of the things that I certainly remember growing up here, I never worked in the barn except for rehearsals, but when the theater was not enclosed, we have so many stories about animals wandering in. So I just wanted to tell you that he can't remember if it was Mr. Roberts or Tea House of the August Moon, but they kept a goat in the back to be in the play. And it always left a stinking mess, and then it would leave a trail of droppings as it crossed through the stage door, across the green room, across the corridor before going on stage. And we occasionally had bats before our theater was enclosed. One marvelous time was when we were doing Dracula, and as I spoke of Dracula turning into a bat at night, lo and behold, if a bat didn't fly at that very moment across the stage. And here's the most wonderful animal story at the lake. My favorite play for sentimental reasons is The Hasty Heart. We did it in 1949, 1950, 1951, 1953, and 1960. At the end, nearly the end of the play, Lockie the Scot, whom I played, temporarily is turned against by his fellow British soldiers. Once, Yank, a character in the play, really bawls Lockie out, and Lockie sinks down onto his cot, alone and forlorn. Well, one evening as I sat on the bed, sad, forgotten by the others, a little hound dog wandered on stage from nowhere, crossed over to me and lay his head on my lap. You could hear the sobs, real sobs from men and women. When I eventually walked off stage, he followed me. What a dog trainer, people must have thought. So, you know, I think Little Lake, I think it's important to recognize our history, but I think it's most important to look ahead. And we have two people in leadership now that I think are really committed to this legacy. I mean, Patty saw Little Lake Theater through the pandemic. It's so important to her for the lake to be involved in the community and for the community to be involved in this theater company. Patrick, I don't understand. I think there's a little bit of a connection that he has to my dad. He's told me that there's a picture in the hallway of my father, and he's told me that every time he walks by, he sort of stops and gives a nod of respect to my dad. This is his first season curating the plays, and I think it's just a really exciting season and one that really speaks to the importance of theater and the importance of legacy. And I just wanted to end by telling you that when my husband and I retired from the lake, we had the opportunity to travel. And we went to the Rioja region of Spain, which is a wine-growing region of Spain. And we went to one of the oldest bodegas, wineries there. It was called, gotta get it right, Lopez de Heredia. And there was a quotation. It was almost 150 years old, stayed in the same family for 150 years. And they were using many of the same winemaking methods that they used from the very beginning. And there was a quotation that was translated from Spanish to English, so something's a little bit lost in the translation. But when I read it, I stopped and wrote it down because it reminded me of this place, of Little Lake Theater. And I just want to read it. We mention tradition, in this case, not as an elusive idea of immobility, stagnation, opposition to change, or complacency, but as a dynamic and aesthetic concept emanated from the maintenance of values and criteria that are defined and remain over time. I think that's what's happening right now. The values are here at Little Lake Theater, and we just want the audiences to come and the actors to come and enjoy it all with us. So anyway, thank you so much for listening to this.
30. Sonny said a lot of things, mentioned a lot of things that I was going to say. But I remember when I worked at one of the local colleges, and somebody said, you know, a professional is someone who comes from out of state and brings visual arts. Well, I live in the great state of Mount Lebanon, and I have brought some visual arts, which you can look at later on if you wish. It's pictures of the barn before it was actually converted to a theater. She mentioned that the barn had horses, and that's what was there on the lower level. And my dad always said that when the first show came around, there were still remnants of the horses, since there was a pile of manure outside the main window. And so that you get that wonderful breeze and smell every night. People used to ask my dad, where do you get your actors? And he always said, all I have to do is open a door. But mostly they came from church groups, local community theaters, University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Tech, the drama people, and they would make the trip out and be in a show. And I can remember evenings at the beginning when it first opened, a couple of actors would sit out on a chair so they could look over the lake and look at the bridge, which was there. And if a car came down the hill and went across the bridge, they would run in and say, we've got a show tonight, we have an audience. They never knew what they were going to find. I guess the things that I remember back in the old barn was, of course, the theater was up, the stage was on the top floor. Underneath were the public restrooms, actors' restrooms, green room, and a very small snack bar. And when we opened this in I think it was 1970 or somewhere around it. No, it was a couple of years after we had opened down there, so it was probably around 51. The only thing we had here was a stockade and the stage and the seats. And on the side, we would have a tarpaulin, which would go from the top of the roof down to the stockade where you could connect it. Obviously, there was no air conditioning back then, so you would roll the tarp up, and that way you would get air that would come through. The problem was when it rained. When it rained, the apprentices and the staff would rush quickly and try to get that tarp down before everybody got soaked. Most of the apprentices got soaked because many times there was no indication that there was a rain coming. It was just automatic. I can remember we're here in this aisle, a couple of us, when it rained, would get out a broom and try to sweep the water back there so it wouldn't go on the stage. One of the things I should probably mention, Sonny or someone mentioned, we've done over 150 shows. As of 2019, and that's when I quit being the historian, we had done 639 different shows, and we had 1,725 people who had acted on this stage. That does not include the children's theater. The apprentices, my dad was an individual that very likely and loved to be called a curmudgeon, and he fit that perfectly. But he also, everybody who hung around him got to know him, respect him, and probably love him. But when he was out here, he had certain rituals. When he would have a show on opening night, he would gather in the green room and ask the cast to come out and circle together, and he would say, I have a very important statement to make. Try not to stink out there. And then he'd walk away. He also would come in after his first appearance on stage, and he would walk backstage and ask the cast, do you think I'm playing it too good looking? He was known for things like that. An ex-actor or one of the former actors would come in the door and he would immediately say, will someone call security? He was known, if you weren't insulted by something he said, you were not really part of the theater. Because he liked to insult everybody that he knew. One of the things that I brought today, which I'd like to read a couple of things of, on his 80th birthday, we had a group gather here in the theater, and it was packed with old actors. I shouldn't say old, I should say former. And at the end of it, we asked people if they would please submit a letter or a note of their experiences at Little Lake and also with my dad. And we got probably 50 to 60 responses. And I would just like to take a minute to read a couple of these because I think it probably gets across what my dad was like from three different viewpoints. One was from Dave James, who at that time was a news reporter on KDKA radio. And he came out here having not done anything. He's on the Hall of Fame, which is people who have done over 20 shows. And when he came out, he wrote this. I first worked with Will Disney in Generation in June of '68. As usual, he was not memorable, but I'll never forget a lesson I learned from another cast member, Bob Jones. Bob was on stage as I made my first entrance at Little Lake, and as I delivered my lines, he acted as if his finger had become stuck in a bottle. It was not broad, his movements were minimal, but I could have been nude and on fire, and no one would have noticed me. After that, I had the misfortune of working with Will in a number of other shows, including 4 summers of The Odd Couple. We kept doing it until we got it right. I always had a sneaking suspicion that I was the only one paying Will a 50% kickback from my expense money, but I was too embarrassed to ask anyone. However, I must admit that Will's hard work and sacrifice have made Little Lake survive where other theaters have failed. In times where others might have given up, Will has continued to insist on giving audiences the best that he and his constantly changing band of players could give. That has made Little Lake one of the most reputable, enduring, and endearing theaters around. The second note that I would like, the second memo, we had a fellow out here. I can remember sitting in the green room, and my dad was in this little office, and there was a knock on the door back there, and we opened it, and there was a young fellow standing there, probably around 18, and he said, "Is Mr. Disney here?" And I said, "My dad is right in here, the green room, go right in." So he went in, and they closed the door and talked. One of the things I found out later, my dad asked this fellow why he was there. And he said, "Because I want to get involved in theater." And he said, "Have you had any experience?" And he said, "None." And he opened the door. When they were done, they came out. I was sitting there, and he came over and said, "Hi, my name is Tom Thomas." And I said, "Well, I'm Dave." And he said, "I've just been hired as the house manager." And I said, "Well, great." And he said, "I only have one question. What does a house manager do?" That's the way. Tom was here for probably like 15 years. He started as the house manager. He then progressed into acting, directing, and then he left the theater. And he came into my dad's office and he said, "Will, I don't know how to say this, but I cannot work here any longer. I am starting my own theater, The Odd Chair, which is back where South Hills Village was." And he says, "I hope you don't be upset." And my dad said, "Good luck. Just remember one thing. You can never have too many theaters around the area." So Tom wrote this thing and says, "We've been having some fires in California, but none to compare to the conflagration that must have even atop your birthday cake. 80 blazing candles. I have always considered you my mentor, Will. The dictionary defines a mentor as a wise and trusted advisor and helper. But you were one more thing, a great friend. My whole foundation in theater was built around the lake. You made it so wonderful to work here. I wanted summer to be 12 months. Forget Christmas, Thanksgiving. They paled in comparison to the opening of another summer season at Little Lake. Nothing can compare to those warm evenings, standing in the shadows, waiting for a cue, listening to the laughter or applause. I wish it could all begin again. I wish I could take it out like a CD and relive it over and over. Professor in college, wrote plays, wrote for TV, Hill Street Blues, many of those. And he called my dad one time and said, I just completed writing a play, and I would like to send it to you and have you read it, which he did, and my dad did. And my dad called back and said, Tom, we would like to do that show at Little Lake. And Tom said, well, we will do that there. That will be the initial performance of my play. And so he came and we did that, kind of completed the whole thing. But Tom was probably one of my closest friends as long as he was here. I'm not going to go into an Amos and Andy story, but we were all called different names of Amos and Andy. I was Andy, he was Amos, Dad was Kingfish. I know this isn't politically correct, but that's how we referred to each other. We would walk past somebody and say, Andy, how you doing? And it added to the family atmosphere. My dad has always said that the main thing he was most proud of was this was a family theater. Everybody who worked here was felt as part of the family, both ways, from Dad and from others. Out of all the actors here, he had once said, I can count on one hand the number of people who have been here who I would not invite to my house. The last thing that I'm going to read is from an apprentice. These are, as we all know, are the backbone of a theater. They get no one knows who they are. They do everything you possibly can do at a theater. They'll usher, they'll do props, they'll do whatever you wish. And we had a young lady from Mount Lebanon who wrote this letter to my dad and said, the biggest thank you. You always let me make mistakes without feeling stupid, and you were always appreciative of the work that I did. At Little Lake, I found another home. I will always look back on Little Lake as one of the best times of my life, and for that, I also thank you. 2 days later, we received a letter from her mother, and it said, everyone needs a hero. Thanks for being that hero for Amy. And that pretty much wraps up the way he was. Everybody was a friend, everybody was welcomed, everybody loved him, and he treated everybody with respect. And so that's pretty much it. I have a couple of these photos from the original theater when it was built. If you'd like to look at them, fine. Just be careful because they're not glued in, so the pictures can fall out. But I also have enjoyed, this has been my life. When I was out here at the beginning, I wish I could go back and live a much better high school experience because I wasn't able to date people, although I snuck a couple in, because I didn't have a car. And so I would come out here on a bus at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and I would stay here until I could get a ride home at around 11. So that gave me every evening, with the exception of Sunday, I was here. And so I've grown with people. Some of my greatest friends are from this theater. And I feel sorry for those that never had an opportunity to work here, because we've had some excellent people, not only actors, but persons. Friendships have developed here. We've had 4 or 5 weddings that have come up by people who have known each other. Actually, I knew Bob Jones's family for quite some time. And I was in a show and his daughter was cast. And I think she was about 12 years old. And her job was, her part was to come in. She was attending a ballet school. She had no lines, and then she left. Several years later, Bob cast her opposite me in a show. And that was the first time that we really got to know each other, and we're still together 47 years later. So I appreciate everybody coming. I appreciate what you said. I certainly appreciate WJPA and Observer Reporter, because without them, we wouldn't be here. They would review every show we ever did. And God bless them, because if they hadn't, we would not have had an audience. So thank you, and we'll let the other people go on.
Now, want me to hold it?
Whoa. Yeah.
Sure.
Dana White.
Yeah, okay.
So I wanted to let you guys know, thank you all for coming so much. We appreciate it. I'll be brief. As Sonny and Dave talked about our history and Patrick's talked about our current season, we are very, very happy to be celebrating some new development on our property, thanks to the Washington County Tourism Board, who are the most wonderful human beings in the world. Can I say that, please? Yeah, I'll say it a lot. The Washington Community Foundation, EQT, the Senator, so much support. And also, we just received funds from the local share fund, which will help facilitate this lovely parking lot that you're going to see. And I'm sure when you all drove in and you felt the gravel and you saw the holes, you understand why this is a very exciting thing for all of us. We should have this project, at least the first phase of it, completed by June. We're very, very happy about that. And I can't tell you how much this community has supported Little Lake Theater. Not only the audience, but all of our friends that continue to come and support and ask us what we need and how they can help. So thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate your support. And we'll see you very soon. April 6th, we open our 75th anniversary. Thank you so much.